So you're all right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming. Gonna do our next research chat for BSEC right now. And this is going to be a cool one because we're going to be hearing from a number of people involved in the Community Engagement Committee and associated community outreach and education efforts. And so Kalia is our leader on this, has pulled this thing together. So I'm just going to hand it right over to her. And I think others will jump in as the presentation proceeds.
Thank you, Ben. I'm really excited about this presentation. Um, we have a few different presenters from our engagement team and some of the other theme teams that have been doing a lot of the leading the engagement throughout the project throughout these last 3 years. So this presentation may not reflect every single engagement activity that has been done through BSEC, through the different theme teams, but it's a good overview and highlights some projects and examples of community engagement that we can continue to do in the future, and that what's happened now, and hopefully gives others a framework for how they can work with community. So we'll share best practices and lessons learned. We'll start with setting the tone and introducing how BSEC first connected with community and how we started engaging Baltimore City at the beginning of the project. We'll go through best practices and lessons learned. So, what we learned just through practice and our own strategies that we've implemented, and then what we've also learned from community members and how we can, improve on future projects. And then moving forward, so different approaches to take as we move along in our work. So, I will pass it to Lisa to take us through BSEC's introduction.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kalia, and everyone for all your work putting together this presentation. Many of you know that the entire BSEC project has been a collaboration with City of Baltimore and our community partners. And so from the very beginning, this was envisioned to be a reciprocal relationship and also to be cyclical. In other words, a series of feedback loops between the science and the research that we were doing and what was important to the communities that we were working with and intended to serve with this project. So we started out with a guiding question of how can BSEC ethically engage partners and our participants in the science that we were working on? And so we looked at a number of different objectives in order to facilitate the co-development or co-creation process with the BSEC team and also community partners. We've established Equitable Pathways Steering Committee, and we also put together programming for outreach and engagement with the community. So you go to the next slide, please, Kalia. So in order to answer this question of, the ethics of how we engage, we did do a literature review to look at that. And several principles in terms of respect and really being able to value our community partners kept coming to the fore. And these were things that we tried to work with throughout the engagement. So at the very beginning, we thought that the summary that was provided by Stanford University for principles of ethics and ethical and effective service were a really good was a really good framework to start with. And so this was shared with the entire BSEC team at our very first all-team meeting in January, almost 5 years back. So the process really began with the writing of the BSEC proposal. So we had community partners, so representatives from especially the two communities of Broadway East and Old Goucher, the Baltimore City, a number of state agencies, including the Sustainability Group, and also nonprofits and businesses that were engaged from the very beginning in helping to frame what was important, what was BSEC going to focus on. For the steering committee, we expanded that initial group. So we asked for those original partners to propose others to sit on the steering committee. And then the community engagement team also nominated people based on who potentially we had worked with in the past and others that had come to the table since the proposal was submitted. And so an original steering committee was established of 12 people.
And
And
then,
then in addition to that, we had a number of community engagement meetings that started in, as I said, in January of 2023, to really hear from the community partners, from the city, what were the challenges and opportunities that they were seeing, and then a couple of a number of, at that first meeting, we put together not just the original science team, but cross-cutting theme teams that were established based on the discussions that we were having. And then for each of those cross-cuts, we had community engagement meetings to help to frame the research questions and also as a touch point for us as we were doing the science. And so I'll let Tasneem talk a little bit more about these meetings and how they informed the heat focus group and some of the work that she was working on.
Thank you, Lisa. Hi, everyone. So we have been working on community engagement activities since 2023. So we started with the kickoff meeting where we had the BSEC team, the scientists, decision makers, and also community people. And we did a workshop to understand different aspects and what are the things we should focus on. And as I'm working part of both heat crosscut and community engagement, so it was really a great way to learn the community feedback in terms of heat mitigation strategies. So in July, during severe summer heat stress, we met with the community people, talked about the different like trees. We also shared the weather station data. In the first picture, we are sharing, Darren is sharing some images, what data we have. In the second picture, we are actually like introducing to the weather station, the like collection system, and if people are interested to have those in their backyard. And some people shared their story of success and how it helped them in terms of making their backyard green and everything. That also inspired other people. And then in September, we had a heat focus group where we had 3 different focus groups, and we asked the similar questions, and we had the observation about what is the current heat condition and the impact on health, and what are the existing facilities they have, what are the other things they need, maybe other community or other neighborhoods have what they don't. So what are the gaps are there? And then we worked on the findings and worked on like what are the things we heard. And in November 2023, we had the opportunity to share back the responses we had and like what are the things we heard, and if they have any other like suggestion or anything to share with us. So it was a great opportunity because we heard community members say like sometimes may people ask us question, but it's really important to know like what you have find out. So it's important to share. So in this way, we could share back with the community and learn from them. Next slide, please. So we identified several opportunities, like the scope of working together, because like people mentioned about it, like what are the opportunities they also see in different rooms. For example, it gives us a platform to share. So what are their concerns are and how we can work on that. And there are scopes of entrepreneurship. For example, there are several scopes of recruitment in terms of heat mitigation and volunteership. And it was several times mentioned that people want us to share the research output or whatever pilot projects we are doing and what are the findings are. And sometimes researchers work on it, but they don't know about what is happening on site. So it gave us the scope for collective site visits so we can see exactly what's happening in reality. And most importantly, it involved all the community members and created awareness. And whatever we are doing, it's like informed by the community. Next slide, please.
I think that is it. So then we go into our best practices. Thanks, Tasneem. That was a good segue into our best practices and our lessons learned. So on the previous slide and the last few previous slides, we talked about the year that BSEC kind of took to set the tone, to engage with community, learn about community priorities and needs. And I think that that's a good example of, not being able to put a time frame on your engagement. We've been learning from community throughout this entire project, but really putting forth effort to make that first year beneficial for both parties. So understanding, what Baltimore City residents are experiencing regarding climate change. And so from that last slide, we learned about different opportunities that community members suggested for how we could engage with them throughout this 5-year research. And so these are some activities and workshops and programs that we implemented that came from those suggestions from community. So we'll talk a little bit about the science education program and the Weather Champions program, but we've also hosted a BSEC Urban Climate and Environment Science Fair. This was hosted in partnership with the Parks and People Foundation, which has been a really good partner. We've hosted other programs with them. We invited our research teams to do science demonstrations with community members on site. We did water infiltration sampling, vegetation and soil, deep core examples of what that looks like with community in a balloon launch, which you see in this photo here. This is from one of our education programs, but we did this same launch during that science fair. So that was another opportunity to connect community members and researchers together in the community. We've hosted weather station workshops to build out those deployments that we partner with community members to place across the city. We've done air quality and bicycle routes, a community walk in Broadway East with one of our steering committee members. We'll talk a little bit about the veg and soils sampling projects and the heat simulation study that Tasneem did, and a flooding study that our water quality team worked on. BSEC also hosted yearly all hands meetings. So every year for the last few years, we've done science meetings and we've done community engagement meetings. The science meetings focused a little bit more on the internal findings and research questions and studies that have been happening, but the engagement meetings were really an opportunity for people to come out and share their experiences and provide us with information and hear from the researchers on how the research is going. So the best practice that we have utilized is creating opportunities for community members to engage with one another and the researchers. As I said, we've spanned it across the city. And so we've really given folks an opportunity to not only meet and work with us, but then also connect with other environmental focused groups. So the science education scope of work, again, I'm hoping that this presentation gives researchers an example of how to frame out your engagement as we continue to write proposals and think about other projects that we may be implementing in the future. So I won't go into a lot of detail about the science education program. I did want to highlight, though, how we organized it into sections and how we kind of created this document with community members. So before even establishing this program, I met with our steering committee members to get a better understanding of what they will be looking for, what type of education or training or information could the scientists bring to the community in a digestible way to get our youth and other adults more engaged in the research. And so we kind of came up with workshops that allowed researchers to kind of show how they're collecting data in Baltimore City, and then also prepare community members to engage with the research and assist with collecting their own data and learn how to collect their own data. So we broke it up into sections. The scope of work includes context, so how we kind of co-created with the community to formulate the document, the purpose of the document. We outlined program goals and outcomes, and so that included me kind of speaking with and learning what the program goals were of our partner sites so that we can incorporate those into the learning objectives to make sure what we wanted to teach and with the information that we wanted to share align with the community's priorities. Responsibilities for both parties. So what should they expect from us as the research team and what we can expect from them as the community partner? And then budget. Budget is really important when it comes to community engagement and research. We want to make sure we have the funding to do community engagement. And so within this budget, the two large things, or the three large things actually, were site utilization fees to help support our partners, stipends for folks, because a lot of these workshops happen between hours of 5 and 7, 4 to 6. There was even at one point 10 to 12, and all of those times were coordinated with our partners in food. So all of our workshops, we did it with over 4 different sites. We worked with a faith-based institution, an urban farm, a rec center, a group of environmental stewards that were veterans. And then now we are working with the Farm Alliance to conduct the program, and it's 3 2-hour workshops. So I will pass it to Tasneem to talk about your heat simulation.
Hi. So I am working on how we can work on heat mitigation in terms of neighborhood scale. And there is an issue, or there's a current gap. For example, we have several environmental software like process or simulation study, but sometimes it's not connected with the community. So we really don't know like what community people are like thinking about all these interventions. So if it's not accepted by the community or not, like they are not willing to adopt those, it won't work in the long run. So that's how, and there are some community engagement activities going on, but maybe they are not backed by the science. So how we can connect this both, how we can connect this bridge. So from there, my research started like bridging computational model and community voices to improve outdoor thermal comfort condition in Broadway East, Baltimore. So how we can design a decision-making framework for selecting those interventions that will be like effective in terms of reducing air temperature, mean radiant temperature, and improving the universal thermal index, and it will be also acceptable by the community. So from there, like from literature review, I have identified 8 strategies, for example, trees, green roof, green wall, which are related with green infrastructure, other 3 interventions, for example, cool pavement, road color change, cool roof, which is working with the surface albedo, and the third type like sprinklers and fountains, which are working with blue infrastructure related with water features that works at neighborhood scale. So from literature review, we know like this, but what about the people and their acceptance in Broadway East? So for that, I did a survey among the people, so to understand 4 aspects. What are their priorities? So out of all this, what are the things they they feel should be the highest priority, the medium priority, or low priority. The second one is like perceived coolingness. So do they feel it will be helpful for their own neighborhood? Third is perceived concern. So what are the issues they're concerned about, like about maintenance or water bills, or what are the issues that they are not like interested in any of those? And fourth one is willingness to adopt. So are they interested to have those in their private property or in their own neighborhood? So, and for this, for example, you see in community engagement, using the visualization was really helpful, because sometimes, like I also heard this from the community people when I did an interview later on, like when we talk these terms, it's really hard for them to understand what we are saying. But if we utilize the visualization, so they know, oh, this is green roof. Okay, this is green wall. Sometimes they are not aware what we are saying because they don't have those in their neighborhood right now. So that's how, like how we can share the simulation results or take the help of visualization so that people can actually give us feedback. What are their priorities and what are their concerns? And that's how like I'm connecting these two. So I selected a small part in Broadway East. I did the simulation, and I also took community engagement to, I heard several times through several workshops. I also attended other workshops that are going on beyond BSEC, and then did my own survey and interviews. And all these are like giving us a scope to like connect this both and understand what are the strategies that will work for this neighborhood.
Thank you. All right, Kathy.
You're muted, Kathy.
Thank you. So I'm talking on behalf of the vegetation and soil team, but with specific emphasis on soils. So from the very early on, we have been engaging with the community in many different ways. And the connection between soils and climate, there is a connection, but it's very hard for many people to grasp. Well, what they understand is health, they understand contamination, they understand, and they worry about their soil. So a lot of our activities were centered around soil quality, especially with regard to soil contamination. We have participated in all of those activities that Kalia mentioned, or most of those education activities. So there are different levels of this engagement. One is when we encounter as our sampling activities, community members come to us, we talk to each other. The other one is when we participate or lead certain, like the Friends of Stony Run soil biome walk. So there is an activity on the weekend when it's specifically focusing on soil health and soil organisms and whatever they're interested talking about soils. We participate in many of these tabling events that will come in later, and special events such as the Earth Day activities in the Green Street Academy. And then we had interns. You can see Ariana on the top, who was an intern for the summer youth camp for the TempleX summer youth camp project. So that's the upper part. So that's kind of a more passive or one-way relationship. The really co-production with the community shown on the bottom part of this slide. And so this is our ongoing project, which we just started when we are assembling soil collection kits and giving out to community. They collecting the samples and then sending to us, and we analyzing it and then reporting back to them individually. We're also producing all these one-pagers or information materials. On the next one, so that's another kind of interaction with the community when this organization, this veteran organization, the sixth branch, that operates three community farms, came to us and asked us to sort of survey and assess their soil in their properties, including places where they grow produce and places where they don't. And so I involved my various ecology classes and undergraduate students, even high school students in this project. So we did a detailed mapping on all of these T6B farms and reporting back to the community the data, and which then they can hopefully use to how they improve the soil, and they can use this data for their own grant writing purposes. Okay.
Thank you. And then we had our water quality team. Julia and Zen from Morgan State worked on a flooding survey that they sent out to community members in Baltimore City, but it also really focused in on communities that have, through research and data collection, that we have seen that experience flooding at higher rates than other communities. To kind of get a more in-depth understanding of how they're experiencing this flooding, what type of flooding are they having. And so they're not here to speak on this, but I did want to share and include this engagement for our water quality work. All right, so best practices and some lessons learned about outreach. There is a method to the greatness. I don't say method to madness. There are some challenges, of course, with community engagement. You can't do everything perfectly. There's always going to be something that comes up, but I think that there are foundational things that you can include in your research when we're writing proposals. Because, like I said, this presentation, I want you all to be able to take something from to, make our grants and our work better. And so including a strategic outreach plan at the beginning. So when we're thinking about, the different communities that we want to work with and the collaborations that we can do, you kind of want to look at it from a who, what, where, when, how, and why to help frame out your outreach and your engagement. So who are the stakeholders that need to be involved in your research based on your topic or your research question? And those stakeholders might not only be just the community leaders. You may need to take a couple of walks to find out who the farmers are, who the artists are, who the youth groups, and the residents that just live in the neighborhood, but maybe experiencing some of the issues that you're looking to, collect data around, but they may not be at the meeting. So really taking the time to sit down and think about the different types and the diverse groups of stakeholders that we can engage. So how are you sharing information? What type of handouts are you using? What type of graphics are you creating? And we'll get into that in a few slides. When are you showing up where? So how are you showing up in the community? Are you tabling at events? Are you participating in science fairs? Before we started, Ben mentioned that he attended a science fair for school and did Corsi boxes for air quality with the youth. There's a bunch of different opportunities to really get engaged with community. And so just being creative and really seeking out the different opportunities to speak with folks. We've had researchers lead talks and participate, like we said, in science fairs and do summits and seminars and all types of things. When are you showing up? So you want to make sure that you're not just showing up when it's time to collect the data. That historically has been a thing that shows up in research. And so BSEC, we did it a lot differently this time around. When it came to our community engagement, we showed up to volunteer. We built really good relationships, interpersonal relationships with our partners. So we weren't just showing up with our BSEC hats on, but we were showing up as individuals. And that's not to say you have to take the personal time and capacity to do that in your schedule, but there are instances where you can, attend an event with one of your partners, or like I said, offer to do a demonstration at one of their environmental events, and they really appreciate you showing up not only when it's convenient for you. So how are you communicating with your partners? Is it better to reach out to them via email? Are they on social media? Are they on LinkedIn? Should you call or text them? Or can you just kind of pop up? We've utilized all those strategies with our partners, just based on their preferences and how they would prefer to engage and what was most convenient for them and for us. So the example here, communicating before popping up, there were a few times where we wanted to just kind of go out and check on weather stations and do maintenance. And, we were scheduling these kind of site visits in the early mornings. People might be out, they might not, but it was more so for us to kind of check on the weather station. And there would be a couple of people that are like, oh, if I knew you were coming, I would have had so and so here, or we did have a question. And so that was just a best practice or lesson learned for us of, no matter if you think you're just kind of going to do something really quick, a quick 5-minute visit has turned into 2 hours for sure with us. So just being prepared and communicating. And then why? Does, should, or would this research matter to you or your community? So it's great that we are going out and we are, wanting to fill data gaps and conduct all of this research, but we do want to make sure it aligns with those specific partners. So making sure we get a good understanding of how we can make sure they understand the benefit of the research to them. And if we need to tailor anything or change around a question, just kind of being open to reframing when possible or when appropriate. Right, DJ will tell us about communications.
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, so a couple of things that we learned as far as the communities that Baltimore consists of, right? When you're communicating with people, not everybody is a scientist. Some people don't have a high school education. Some people, you have to be willing to communicate with them and make it more digestible, make it more relatable to them. We want to make sure that we're tailoring the language that they can understand, right? So they may not necessarily understand heat index, but they understand that heat, things trap heat and then they expel them later. So if you break it down for them just a little bit further, they can sometimes, most of the time they'll grasp those higher level concepts. Story maps is a good way of visualizing this information. So if an area is prone to flooding, that was one thing that Sheen did, was actually create a story map that shows Baltimore's flooding history, right? Tasneem did a great job with showing how these things could change what it is that they're feeling based on how they just do their infrastructure, or different improvements that they could make to their infrastructure. You want to make sure that you're designing something that they can take home with them as well, right? So the toolkit that Kalia worked on, and making sure that all of your partners have those things accessible to them that they can then share with their communities, right? The whole point of this is to make sure that they're able to work in their community and better expand the knowledge base and the efficacy of our work, and to make it so that they have those toolkits available to them so that they can further their own, their own purposes. The newsletters. I know that Darren has been working on the newsletters and sending them out, I think, quarterly, for the different heat events, for the different ice events. Those things are really important to share with your partners to make sure that they are at least on their radar as they're working through and communicating with people. It can help them be better prepared to communicate information in the future by seeing how it's done. Public relations and organizing photos and content. This has kind of been a big one. We want to make sure that we're able to share the story. We want to make sure that we're able to collect the information, and that helps give credence to people who want to work with us in the future, or to us, for people to want to work with us in the future. And community engagement has to be interdisciplinary, right? So one of the things that we found was an engineer, a researcher, and a planner all working together to draft the communications plan, to draft the toolkits that are going to be made available, right? Each team should have somebody on their team dedicated to communications, dedicated to community outreach, dedicated to making sure that the things that they're working on are then translatable. It's certainly helpful to communities when you go out there. And social media manager or communication consultant, I know Miriam and Lisa have both done amazing work in making sure that the science that we've been working on is translated for people who are both in the scientific community and in the general population community. And so those things are really important to have when you're talking about developing your communication strategy. Next slide, please. Outreach and framing. So we want to make sure that what it is that we're doing is going to be relevant to the people that we're working with, to the institutions that are already there. So we want to make sure that we're framing the any presentations that we're giving. They can have generalized knowledge, like the science education program, but getting its allowing it to be or making it a little bit more specific in how it's going to affect the partner that you're sharing the information with is certainly more valuable to them than just a generalized information infographic. You want to make sure that you add examples of data applicability and data impact, right? So for instance, if you're working for an urban farmer, the data could serve as protection. It could serve as a foundation for, how much water they're going to need. It could serve as an educational toolkit for them, right? An opportunity to teach anybody that, let's say they're a teaching farm. They have an opportunity to teach how this data is collected and the information that comes from it. If you're working with faith-based institutions, right? Like this is an opportunity for them to use the data for compassionate work, right? So they may be interested in providing a cooling shelter or providing some sort of community food bank or making sure that there's some sort of water feature in a community that doesn't have it. The faith-based institution has typically been there a little bit longer and they operate in a space where compassion is kind of key to their messaging. City parks and rec, working with them for making any sort of operational decision making or making sure that they know that their workers need to have more water available to them, right? When they're out in the parks and they need to make sure that they're aware of heat stroke and making sure that they know how they themselves could be affected by their experiences with the climate. And we want to make sure that we're also including age appropriate activities. So making sure that if you're going to an event, you have something for the kids to do, right? Whether it's a coloring book, whether it's it's some markers. We use pinwheels and we color. And I always ask them the same question. What happens if it's spinning really, really fast, right? What's happening in your environment at that time? And at the end of it, they can kind of visualize how the wind is going to blow on the pinwheel. Next slide, please. And these are just some examples of outreach that we've done. So we've done tabling with farmers markets and the DPW Grow Center. I've got an event this Saturday that I think Darren is going to be sharing in the Slack channel that we're going to be, we've got a table with them this weekend. Friends of Great Kids Farm, they have field trips that from BCPS that come out there a couple times a year. And so we've tabled there or some of their community events that we have, which in the bottom picture, you'll see Darren and two of his students actually creating the pinwheels with some of the kids. When we're doing site visits and partnered events, right? Like it's very useful for the science education program that we went to the ARM site and we were able to see some of the more expensive and the cooler equipment, right? Rather than just the weather station. It was really interesting for them. But also, hosting a beekeeping event that we did a couple of weeks ago at Piedmont Outdoor Learning Center. That was fantastic. It was a little bit rainy, but that's okay. The bees were comfortable and people, we were able to help other beekeepers, other apiary keepers actually build a community together and give contact information between each other. And then the last one is just community presence, right? So the bottom picture, Shamara, Kalia, and I, we all went out after a care community event and we just talked to the corner store owner. And just so happened that there were a couple of people there outside, kicking it, having a good conversation. And they saw us across the street, but they didn't know what we were doing. So we took the opportunity to actually go and talk to them and tell them about what it was that we were doing and give them some of the information that we had with us that we were sharing at the care community. And yep. So I think Kalia, you're taking this one.
Yeah, so these are some examples of outreach materials that you can design, more community-facing materials for folks to kind of see and invite them to events and some of our partner things. So we have This one has been really helpful. This Baltimore Social Environmental Collaborative Get Involved kind of infographic. We have this at all of our all hands meetings, whenever we're tabling, just because, you know, it's good for the follow-up to keep folks involved and engaged, and also provide them opportunities for them to get in contact with us. And then these are just some other flyers that we have for our events. The toolkit that DJ mentioned is about, I don't know, maybe 30 pages of information and talking points for our host sites that have weather stations that may want to do a community walk. We actually recently had a meeting with the representative for NAMI, and they told us about nature walks that they do. And so we provided them the Baltimore Community Weather Network website for them to kind of see, like, where are the weather stations in our neighborhood or across Baltimore City, and if they want to host a nature walk and go past a weather station, to kind of incorporate that into more events and more conversations. And then the pinwheel activity that DJ mentioned, Darren and his students were able to translate that into Spanish. And so that's been really helpful because as we move across, you know, a diverse range of people and organizations and communities, folks have, you know, they ask for and they appreciate the Spanish materials. And then down here, we have a flyer for recruitment for the Weather Champions program, which is kind of a pipeline that we've tried to create with the weather research. So first, hoping that folks go through the science education program, which is very general knowledge about sampling and testing and weather and climate, and then moving into, all right, now that we have this weather station and this data, how do we analyze it? And, you know, being able to provide them the technical assistance to understand the data and make it useful for them. And then we have some examples of still can be community facing, but also some internal examples of how we can translate our work. And so this collaborative agenda is what we created for the science education program. So each workshop, they receive an agenda of what we'll kind of go through. And this agenda specifically is maybe about 7 or 8 pages long. And he offers them all of the materials they would need to complete their own infiltration testing, the materials that they'll need, and talking points. And this was also something that came from conversation with community as we prepared for the science education program of what they would want or what they were looking for. And one of our partners mentioned, you know, can you provide us with a template just in case, you know, maybe you all aren't available or we want to recreate this activity, or we have other researchers or environmental partners that maybe can come and recreate this activity. It would be great for you all to have something to leave behind. And so I worked with Miriam, our communications consultant, and each of the theme teams to create these agendas. And that's just a great example of the cross collaboration that happened within BSEC. So there was a lot of community engagement, but there was a lot of us working across theme teams to make a lot of this possible. And so you'll see here the one pagers that Miriam and I worked on with the theme teams, an example of Darren's heat map, or I'm sorry, not heat map, his heat newsletters that he sent out over the past couple of heat waves that he would share with community. We always have this template here with us, again, for the accessibility purposes for folks to help them download the app or get on the website and log in and be able to see the data. And then these are just some other flyers that we have from other events. And then templates. So we also created a few different workshops that we can go out and give to community members. A lot of the engagement, there was a lot of engagement around the weather stations, but then there are also folks who may not have a weather station, but they're just curious or interested. And so we're doing for a little minute Weather Wednesdays, where we would go to host sites that were partners or new partners that were interested in working with BSEC and give workshops around weather. And so this is just an example of a template that you can create internally so that maybe it's not you that's going out and giving this presentation, but you can share with someone else on your engagement team or share with another researcher. On the left side kind of talks through the actions that you would do, and on the right side there are talking points for you. So this was really helpful in the beginning because sometimes Shamara was able to be there, sometimes it was just me. So it was good for us to kind of always be sharing the same information with folks, so that we're not, completely going left depending on who's presenting. You can have shared language. And then on the right was a document that Miriam and I worked on, and we shared with the EPSC to get their feedback on kind of an engagement process. And so I would recommend having some type of informal/formal process that you have internally for folks to know how to even start engagement. So you may have an idea for a project or a workshop that you want to do, but you don't know how to start or where to start. This was something that we created, and this isn't the whole document. There were like 6 steps on here, but just a way for people to kind of, know what steps to take to begin engaging folks in their research. So all of these things can also be shared if you're interested in getting them. And then DJ can talk about the champions again.
Yeah. So the Weather Champions is the program that we've been working towards educating our host sites on how to maintain and sustain the data and the equipment surrounding the weather stations. There are roughly 50 weather stations around Baltimore City, some of them private homeowners in private yards, some of them at faith-based institutions, urban farms, outdoor education centers. And this was from our first cohort last fall. And so one of the question that we were asked was, how do you sustain the collaboration? Trying to get them to think about how do they continue working in their capacity as a weather champion with their host site, as well as working with researchers from Hopkins, Morgan State, Penn State, and be willing to work in more research further, later on. And so some of the things that they mentioned, some of the feedback that we got was they wanted routine meetings, whether it's quarterly or annually, in person or virtual, just to kind of share information about their site and what's been going on in the last year and what problems or solutions they may have found and come up with over that time. Active and open communication. This was kind of a big one that they touched on was, they want to make sure that there's research reports, but a group chat would be nice too, right? Like a WhatsApp group or a text group or a Slack channel, right? Something that they can all use to communicate with each other and ask questions and have answers, right? Like even a Reddit forum was what one of the engineers suggested. Hold up your side of the collaboration, right? So they talked about accountability. Making sure that the researchers were still going to be present when they were needed, but making sure that they were still going to be able to continue to perform their duties as weather champions, doing the maintenance, collecting the data, and towards ultimate data sovereignty with the weather station data. And then quality contact information and having that in a central location. So all of the weather champions have access to a Google Drive that has contact information for, I believe myself, Kalia, and Shamar, as well as there's a couple of other people on there. They've got access to any and all training materials that we went through with them. They've got access to any and all of the documentation that we gave them, and that they are free, they're free to share that information with other people within their organization. But making sure that they still had some way of contacting us should something happen or should they need some technical assistance. That was really a big touch point for them.
Thank you. Before we move on, Mac, can we get a check-in on time? We have 10 minutes left. Do we need to speed through or do we have some flexibility?
We can have some flexibility. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. We're getting close to the end regardless. So evaluation, Lisa talked a little bit about this in the beginning as a best ethic practice. And so we've definitely worked to incorporate evaluations within our education programs and our workshops. And so for the weather station workshop, at the end of each one, we had folks complete a survey on their experience, if they would want to stay involved with BSEC, what maybe like a comment on what they learned, or how they could see this research and this data being valuable to them. And so I found, especially, I know this has been reiterated throughout the presentation, but in order to, I think, sustain collaboration and partnership with community as a researcher, the best thing that we can do is to make sure they understand the benefit for them. Because if they don't understand the benefit or they don't see where they kind of fit in or they don't see how they have impacted the research through their lived experience, then that is kind of where the relationship starts to dwindle. And so using these evaluations to really improve and make sure we are, providing community with the benefit, because we are benefited through the data that we collect, but they also need to see that. We also did an ethics survey that Derek will talk about on the next slide, but I've also been doing science education evaluations for the education program. So the first year that we did the program, the questions that I used for the evaluation were more knowledge-based. And so they were more like, this is right and this is wrong. And that evaluation was developed based off of the learning objectives. So what I knew the researchers would be talking about and teaching during those workshops, and then seeing if folks trying to really see like how they retain that information by asking, right or wrong questions or multiple choice questions. And so from that evaluation, we did see that there was a significant impact from the education program, because I also wanted to make sure, okay, is this actually impactful and worth it to be doing this? And so we saw we did pre and post tests, and there was a significant impact, 28% to 61%. Strong learner, the 72% to 94%, and then the point reduction, 2 out of 10, just represents that 2 people didn't necessarily have any type of improvement score. So their pre-test was better than the post-test. And then again, the theme teams provided the questions. So that first CR really worked with the facilitators from the research teams who are going to be actually teaching the workshops to help me formulate the questions. But then those results were good to know, like, okay, cool. They retained some information and they got the answers right. But as I thought about it, I'm like, that's still not really good enough for me. I really want to track their understanding and if they can apply what they're learning in the education program to, their work that they're doing in the community. And so I moved from more knowledge-based evaluation to a more reflective-based evaluation. And so you'll see the questions here that I asked were more reflective of more feelings and more, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? So this was also a pre and post survey that we gave. The reflection questions were along the lines of like, what is your understanding of how climate change is affecting your neighborhood? What type of testing have you done or can you do to track climate or environmental changes? What type of materials or supplies would you need? What are scientific measurements? Why are scientific measurements important to track? And what are 3 things you want to take away from the BSEC science education program? So not necessarily, right or wrong answers, but this also kind of helped us to see if folks retain information from the workshops. And I also used the learning objectives for this. And so I have here, it's a bit small, so I'll just read a couple. But based on the pre and post, so I had them do the pre-survey before the first workshop, and then they go through the 3 2-hour workshops, and they do the post survey. And so an example of some answers were London, who participated, to the question about what is your understanding. She could describe how climate change and natural disasters can affect homes. But then after the training, she was able to use actual like scientific language, like air and water quality and atmospheric pressure. She spoke to that. Beforehand, she did know about weather stations that measure the air. But after the workshop, she used terms like atmospheric pressure testing and infiltration testing and water filter testing. She mentioned that they would need technology to collect data and cylinders and tape. So it was a really good example of how folks already have a good understanding of what they're experiencing. They are the experts of, their life experiences, but research can help folks put more of a scientific validation to, what they're going through in the environment. So I really liked this version of the evaluation better than the first one. And I'll let Derek talk more about the ethics results.
Yes. So we investigated a survey study on ethical considerations by hearing from adults who have participated or collaborated in BSEC program, because we believe that their experience and opinion help researchers to refine their research practice for the benefit of the entire community. So as we can see on the top, on the right hand side, on the left hand side, so most of our participants in this survey were either males or females, and the age range was between 20 to 79 years old. It's also important to mention that community members, participants represented diverse Baltimore communities, included, for instance, Old Culture, North Baltimore, or even the Broadway East. So as we can see on the left-hand side, so most of those participants have either participated in a weather station workshop, weather stations hot sites, community science program, or science education program. Um, Most importantly, also participants reported diverse motivations for engaging with BSEC. Most frequent motivations was to improve lifestyle in their community and to build a relationship with researchers. In addition, most participants strongly believe that BSEC will lead to a positive change in their community. Also participate and decant, as we can see on the figure in the center on the bottom, that they have having a positive experience engaging with BSEC when it comes to, let's say, humility, respect, as well as inclusions of community voices, value, identities, accountabilities, and transparency. So also, they've also show that the experience with BSEC enhance also their capacity to engage in future types research similar to the one with BSEC. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Derek. And I wanted to make sure I included evaluation in here and just really press the issue of thinking of evaluation, though, again, at the beginning of the project versus the end, because I think that will also help to give a more comprehensive as you're going along. You can continue to do these types of evaluations and have access to the folks to complete these type of evaluations from start to finish. And so, having this evaluation in the beginning and being able to kind of share it with folks while we have them with us is also a best practice and a lesson learned, in my opinion, because people have lives and they move on. So trying to go back later to get folks to complete surveys and do QR codes, that can be challenging. So just thinking about evaluation also when we're writing for these projects and how we plan to evaluate our experiences with folks is going to be really helpful. And so I'll pass it over to Ben to talk about our steering committee.
Thanks. This has been amazing. And so I'll be brief because I know we're going to lose some people at the top of the hour here. The steering committee, I would say, has been a mixed experience. So we assembled the steering committee according to plan at the very beginning of the project. And I think that we were trying to do a lot with this, right? It's got the name steering right in its name. And so it's certainly there to provide project oversight, make sure that communities guided our activities and that it was consistent with all the ethical considerations that have already been described. We were also using the steering committee to network and grow the project. And so we were bringing people on because of the networks they had different parts of the city. And we were also forming a steering committee quickly because the whole project was based on co-designing. We thought, well, we need a team to co-design with. And so first of all, I want to say there were some really useful meetings that happened with the steering committee, and we got some great people onto the network through the steering committee. So, it had a lot of value. It never fulfilled its overall mission. And, I think there's some lessons that we can draw from that. Part of this was when a big project like this starts and it's splashy, you just want to hit the ground running, get the co-design going early on. I think maybe a more deliberate process of discussing with the partners who had written the project with us first, and making sure that we had a clear sense of the various purposes of the committee. bring people on maybe with more specific roles. So yes, we want a general co-design and oversight, but if we say, okay, well, we have education and outreach, we have research design, we have various things going on. If people felt that they had leadership of an element of that, some structure might have helped so that people knew why they were in the room. Um, and then I will say, just from a practical standpoint, again, we wrote this proposal with some people who ended up in the steering committee, had them gave them the power to invite other people in, but then also drew from other networks. And so I think being more deliberate in how we brought people in, maybe having preliminary meetings as people came together, and also, quite frankly, making sure that the resources went to the people who understood that they were getting resources based on the writing of the proposal, would have been really important. And this is structural, right? Like at the universities, we didn't have to wait for each other, right? The government sent money straight to the universities. Then we had community partners, and they were entirely dependent on being able to get a university to send the money, to get the resources to them, then require that they jump through certain hoops that their organizations might not have been ready for. And so understandably, when you've got one institution or one kind of institution controlling the resources and kind of doling them out in ways that were very bureaucratic and slow, I think that led to some confusion, right? And who was on the steering committee to receive resources, who was not. And that's just very understandable that would lead to, I think, somewhat it turned into tensions, right? And I really regret that not managing that better at the beginning, because those were tensions that didn't have to be there, right? I think people were eager to work together. And again, I don't want to be overly negative. We got some good collaborations out of this, but it could have run more smoothly if expectations and resources were a little clearer at the beginning. But I don't want to talk too much more because we still got a few things to get through.
Thanks, Ben. All right, so data integrity. This conversation came up a lot as we were engaging with folks, because of course there was a lot of data being collected. And I think having a better understanding of the term data sovereignty and what that looks like and how to implement that would have been really helpful on our end. To have more conversations about that in the beginning, because for us, it's like, well, especially in regards to the weather data, it's like, well, we don't, it's about ownership. And that data it's public, it's available. And so we're like, I mean, it's out there, it's accessible. But there were deeper conversations about data sovereignty and integrity and who has what and where is this going. And so a lesson learned for sure. And this is a quote that I took from actually another Stanford article. The Stanford Social Innovation Review did an article around data integrity. And they said, instead of treating data collection as something done to communities, data accountability agreements create space for honest discussions with communities. And so as we move forward, considering these agreements and how we design these with community members, as we work with them, these are some questions that they suggested we ask in that process in framing these accountability agreements. So why are we asking for this information? Who will see this information? How will we build consensus for using this information? How will we return it back to you? And how will we give credit and acknowledgement? And so I included an article that Darren Waugh, one of our researchers, wrote on the Baltimore Community Weather Station Network. And he included our community partners as authors on this article. And so that really helps to uplift and bring awareness to the work that they're doing in these sites. So I think that was a great example of joint authorship. But again, really having that conversation around data integrity at the beginning and formulating these different types of agreements with our partners so that everyone has a clear understanding. Okay, so we've been through how we got started, some of the best practices that we've utilized and that we've learned throughout this last few years. And now I want to kind of end us moving towards the future. So I'll invite Lisa to talk about partnerships and sustaining partnerships into the future.
Great, thank you. So the community engagement is not just about how we work with our community partners, but also how we work with each other. And so the crosscuts are an example of that. These monthly research chats are important to that communication with each other. But we also want to think about how the science is moving forward and how we're training future generations of researchers, of professionals who will be hopefully more in tune to the communities that they're working with. And so how we brought the science that was happening into the BSEC team to courses, to extracurricular opportunities, was also important. So one example was the Solar Grow program or project. So this was a competition, a collegiate competition that was hosted by the Department of Energy, where Penn State undergraduate students and Morgan State graduate students worked together with the Farmer Chippy and the farm in Baltimore to think about what was the BSEC team learning about buildings and energy, about energy justice, and how could we take that into rethinking the built environment. So I'm not going to go too much into detail, but if people would like to talk about this offline, I would be happy to speak more to who was involved and how this process took place. Dr. Shamara is out representing BSEC at a community meeting as we speak, but she wanted me to mention the opportunity for chance encounters and to bring BSEC into the work that we're doing. So in fall of 2024, I was working with a class here at Penn State and at the Federal University of Viçosa in Brazil. And one of the Brazilian students was looking at issues of community flood resilience. And so I connected her with Dr. Hunter at Morgan State, and she and Dr. Shamara have been continuing to collaborate on projects. So another opportunity of thinking about the future, thinking about students, thinking about how the BSEC work can actually inform the BSEC work, the science that we're doing, as well as our engagement processes are taken into the next generation of work.
Thanks, Lisa. And then we have, is this? Okay. There is a slide. Oh, okay. I skipped a slide by accident. So again, working with community-based organizations and for-profit institutions, charter schools, we've kind of are learning, like I said, as we go along. Those are good partners to work around city policy barriers. So, we have tried to work with Baltimore City Schools around, curriculum and data and research. And, there are barriers that we won't get into now. But working with private institutions are a good way to kind of continue partnership with education institutions. So considering charter schools, to partner with, understanding the nuance of people who want climate research for production and impact versus political and financial uses. And so going back to that outreach and that framing slide is just, this is a follow-up from that. And then as Lisa mentioned, international partnerships are a great resource for knowledge transfer purposes and for continuing research across the world, because Baltimore City is not the only place experiencing these issues. We're all fighting climate change here. And then this is just an example of a flyer that we use. You saw the Weather Champions flyer. This one is one that we shared with businesses as we went out to talk to businesses about how they could engage with the research. And so recommendations, and this is an opportunity now at the end for folks to kind of share if you have other recommendations. I listed these few to kind of give more local context. Well, this one isn't local. The last two are local. But The Wrong Complexion for Protection by Dr. Robert Bullard, who is one of the founding folks who coined the term environmental justice, is a great example of, climate justice. The Intersectional Environmentalist by Leah Thomas is also a great book that I haven't gotten through all the way, but it gives a lot of different props and things to think about as you engage with community members around environmental issues. Not in My Neighborhood gives local context to, we didn't really talk about the Black butterfly in this presentation, but it gives good local context to why certain communities may be experiencing more environmental hazards or experiences than others. And then The Black Butterfly by Dr. Lawrence Brown is also a great book. Some participatory trainings that a few of us have taken or hosted throughout this process. Dr. Shamara led a reflective writing training with some of our students on the research teams, which was helpful in developing also the reflection evaluation that I used. DJ and I took an effective facilitator training because through all of this work that we're doing, you also just have to be really good at hosting meetings and one-on-ones and collaborative events. A lot of this stuff was done across teams, across researchers, across people who are speaking different languages. And so just being able to facilitate those conversations is a start. And then Lisa, did you want to talk about the supplemental training?
Sure. So Dr. Tanya Sanders Thatch and I participated in one of the IFL DOE supplemental cross IFL grants to look at transdisciplinary research. So we don't have time to get into terms, but basically transdisciplinary research is another way of saying everything that we've been talking about today. So engaging researchers with community. And so in this cross IFL, we were able to engage with the different teams to talk about how they were engaging with communities in the research questions. But we also put together a series of training modules. So there are 3 training modules that are have been recorded and are now available on the ASU website for future researchers who would like to engage in this kind of work. So I encourage you, there are only 3 of them, but they are packed with information about how to get started in the process, more about the lessons learned of the ethics of engagement, and also some of the specific methods that have been used by the different IFL teams and are possible for future work.
Perfect. Well, I know we don't have time for a discussion because we're over, but the goal was to finish this in 45 minutes, but I thought this was all really important and I wanted to get it all out. So thank you for allowing us to go over a little bit. And then Mac, I don't know, or Ben, if we want to allow people to have questions or comments, but thanks everyone. And hopefully you got something from this presentation.
Yeah, Kalia, thank you so much, and thanks everyone for this. Yeah, it ran long, which I think is testament to just how much you guys have accomplished. This remarkable material. I saw some people rotating in and out. We lost some people towards the end here because we went over the hour, but also we're going to record this. We're going to have it up online, and just as a resource, I think it's tremendous. I think you're right. We probably shouldn't hold people longer for discussion because I'm sure people are already late for the next meeting. But let's keep this conversation going, right? I think there's such a strong foundation here. And so even though we don't have time to do these questions right now, let's make sure we don't lose them. And maybe we can follow up about a way to have a focused discussion in the near future.
Nice.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks again so much. Wonderful
Thank
work.
you.
All right.
Thank
Take care.
you.